My name's Kelsey Hegarty. I'm an academic here at the Department of General Practice at the University of Melbourne, and I'm the co-chair of the Melbourne Research Alliance to End Violence Against Women and their Children with Professor Cathy Humphreys from Social Work. And it's our great pleasure to welcome you here today to talk about, does technology do more good than harm in the context of violence against women? I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which this event is taking place, the Wurundjeri people, and pay respect to their elders and families past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge that there'll be survivors in the audience here, and I hope our discussion is empathic to your experience. I also want to begin by acknowledging that men are victims in society and in the community. Just today we're concentrating on violence against women in our discussions. So we know that technology can be utilised to cause great harm to women and children through monitoring, harassment, sexual abuse, humiliation and threats. However, we also know that it can be harnessed to do good. Some of us present in the audience have spent the day at an eSafe Relationships workshop organised by MAEVe, our Melbourne Research Alliance. And we've discussed how technology can also assist in preventing and responding to violence against women. And this can range from primary prevention, such as the work that's been done by Our Watch with the line around respectful relationships. It can be done in the early intervention space. We heard a lot about safety decision aids for women, and we're developing one at the University of Melbourne called Either Side. But also there's quite a range in the tertiary sector about assisting with response and access to services, such as the DAISY app that the Commonwealth Government's funded through 1800-RESPECT, which is the telephone hotline that assists with women. But tonight we have a wealth of experience both in the room and on the panel as well. And I'll begin by introducing each of them. And I'll start with, I was going to start with Clementine Ford, you're first on my list. So Clementine is a freelance writer, broadcaster and public speaker who writes on feminism, pop culture and social issues. To her, your left, is Nancy Glass, who's a Professor of Nursing and Public Health from Johns Hopkins University in the States. And we have Cathy Humphreys, who is, as I said, the Professor of Social Work at the University of Melbourne. On this side, we have Mark Oliver, who's General Manager Emerging Technologies at Tigerspike, a company. And then we have Emily Maguire, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Domestic Violence Resource Centre Victoria, and Anastasia Powell, a feminist and criminologist and Senior Research Fellow at RMIT University. And what we're going to do, the format of this evening, is that I'm going to ask them some questions, and they're going to have a bit of a discussion, and then we're going to take some questions. So that's also the Twitter, if any of you are tweeters, go right ahead and tweet away. So I think I'm going to start with Cathy. That's all right? So you've been in this area for a little bit of time, maybe 20 years or so, and I'd like you to comment, and you've particularly been in the response end of the thing. I'd like you to comment, how have you seen technology changing the landscape for violence against women and children?
Okay. Now, I just noticed that I can't see half the people up the back, so it means they probably can't see me, so I might stand up.
Good on you.
You can probably see everybody.
I can stand up.
Well, it may be.
Maybe a little height thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so let me just think about that question for a minute. I guess about 12 years ago, so thinking about the role of research in relation to how that technology might be changing the space in the area in the research space. And about 12 years ago, when I was still in the UK, we were very concerned about issues around children and domestic violence, and we'd just been looking at a lot of papers, and there'd been 118 papers that had been looked at in relation to children and domestic violence, and told you how children were affected. And we thought, well, actually, we were being approached by a funder about what might we do in this space, and we thought we don't want to do any more of that because we know that children are affected negatively by domestic violence. So what could we do? And so we said, well, we were really interested in the mother-child relationship and how you might strengthen the mother-child relationship that's been under attack over many years through domestic violence. And so we were looking at working with women and children in refuges and outreach services to develop a series of activities that you might work with therapeutically with women and children. Now, what we noticed...
It's lucky she's got a big voice.
Here I am. Who needs height? But I guess at that time we thought, this is 12 years ago, we would be doing online activities. And what was very clear was there was neither the technology in the refuges or in the specialist women and domestic violence sector or amongst the women that we were seeing that they didn't have the access to the technology that would make it very easy for them to access activities together with their children. Now 12 years later, more than 12, about 12 years later, thinking about can these now be adapted to online and checking and thinking about the feasibility of online activities for, some of the most vulnerable women in our society, particularly if they're living in poverty. And I think that there's some real issues in relation to technology about the fact that it's both ubiquitous, but there's still a group of people where we have got a digital divide. And so thinking about how we both extend ourselves to be inclusive and to recognise the enormous opportunities in the digital world and the online world, as well as also thinking about the fact that we still have a digital divide, and actually this could be one of our most fundamental divides in going into the future, and for the isolation of women and their children who don't have access to some of these technologies. And so it's a real challenge for researchers in this area.
Thanks, Cathy. And we know that the digital divide is getting less and less and less, probably as we're all sitting here. And particularly, I think the issue is that many of the things that can assist are actually for women who may be isolated at home or have a disability or in a rural area. So I think we are reaching out to them. But with this reach of technology, I'm going to turn to Clem Ford now, and you've had a lot of personal experience of abuse online. And through your public presence as a speaker, and about gender issues and against violence against women. So could you tell us about that and what you see the role of social media in trying to prevent that sort of, or what's a balance for that? How do you see all this?
I was just thinking of your description there and that being on my headstone.
Yeah, no, I won't.
She had a lot of experience of abuse online. What a legacy. Firstly, I have to apologise, by the way, because I'm on a kind of a creaky chair and I've got a lot of social anxiety about making noise when other people are speaking. So if you see me kind of shifting around strangely, it's because I'm calling more attention to it than I want to be. I just kind of, I guess, acknowledge that I have a completely different area of expertise to the people on this panel, and I think of them as being experts and me as just being kind of a person who uses Twitter and Facebook a lot. I don't really have a lot of direct workplace knowledge about the different mechanisms that we can use to help women, particularly who are suffering from men's violence or their children, but I do really acknowledge that digital divide as well, and the fact that if they are able to have access in their homes, they're not necessarily able to use it. So my perspective really comes from the risks that are supposedly out there for women and for girls who use online tools, and the positives as I see it. And I think that the title of the panel actually is really interesting to me, does technology do more good than harm? Because so often when you're talking about young women, especially in their use of technology, it's always framed as this thing that will harm them and that they will be exploited by. And the fundamental kind of idea behind that is it comes back to, the classic idea that young women are unable to make informed choices for themselves and they don't have agency over what they do. So this kind of assumption that young women especially need to have paternalistic control over what they're doing, and they need to have outside forces controlling the way that they use their bodies, the way that they use their words, etc., because they're incapable of being able to, I guess, kind of navigate this minefield out there. That's a really convenient way to ignore the fact that when young women use technology and it's used against them, that there's actually a crime being committed. So it's a really useful way that we're all familiar with, that we kind of project that behaviour onto the failure of young girls to adequately understand the world that they live in. And we hear that a lot, which is one of the things that I guess kind of midway through last year I responded to a post that Sunrise made on their Facebook account, which they were responding to news that 400 young women and girls in Adelaide had had their photographs stolen and shared on a hacker's website, and they were nude photographs. And the way that Sunrise framed it was, when will young girls learn? Which many of you may have remembered when that happened. And so I did this kind of, I guess people called it a stunt, but it wasn't being done to get attention for myself, which is also something that women are accused of all the time. If we do anything that raises attention for the political issues that we care about, we're just doing it as a stunt to get attention for ourselves, because we're all obviously greedy for praise, etc. That's one of the main criticisms of girls taking selfies of themselves. And so I made a response to this, and with that came a lot of support for the message that I was sharing, which was essentially that no one has any responsibility to anyone else in regards to, or rather, let me frame that in a different way. If you share images in an intimate scenario with people who you should have every right to trust will keep those images safe, then you are not the one at fault if those images are stolen from you, or if they steal them and they use them to humiliate and shame you. There was a lot of support for that message, but there was also a huge amount of abuse that came as a result of that. And the interesting thing about that wasn't so much that it happened, because I expected that to happen, although I've never seen that many penises in my life. But it was that then I was further blamed for inviting this response, that because I was an attention seeker who had just put myself out there, and how dare I, because I'm disgusting anyway and no one wants to see that. Because I'd put myself out there, I should expect that this was the response. And of course we understand that response to women from way before technology even allowed for all of these opportunities. If women do a certain thing, what can they expect in response, aside from being abused, aside from being assaulted, aside from being exploited and harassed? So for me, the interesting thing about this whole question is about how harm is always, or the risk for harm is always something that's projected on to girls as being something that not only we should avoid, but that we should give our agency over to other people to allow them to avoid it for us. Because essentially the best way to control us is to keep us under the thumb of other people. But actually my experience, despite all of that abuse, despite all of the constant kind of onslaught of not even necessarily always really toxic and abusive comments, but just noise, just endless noise that functions really as a distraction. And that for all women who experience abuse online is just kind of like, it's like a plague of locusts that just keeps us from doing our actual work. That actually the things that I always take away from technology is the incredible positives that it brings. For anyone who's familiar with Susan Felidi's backlash, we know that the backlash will always find different ways to manifest itself based on how feminism and women's liberation is operating at the time. And as my experience becoming kind of an aware feminist in the early 2000s, before we really had the access to technology that we have now, although that was starting to begin, my experience was that we were still encountering newspaper articles and media reports about how feminism was over. Young women weren't interested in it anymore. It was this old, dead, dying thing, and this was a really effective way to kind of control the dialogue and the conversation. Because if there is an inability for women to connect with each other on a mass scale, and all you have is media telling them all the time that the feelings that they have are wrong and that they're in a minority and that no one else shares those feelings, and that essentially their philosophy is if not dead, dying, then of course you have an effective way to kind of keep them separated from each other. But the amazing things that social media and technology has done for the women who are able to access it is that it's created these incredible online communities, which I see a lot of women who are either younger than me or of my generation who definitely will know what I'm talking about, but even women who are maybe a generation older than me who are able to connect now in different and new ways. And not only does that give you reassurance that you're not the only one who has these thoughts, because this is something that certainly my experience was as a young feminist, and I hear a lot from young women now that they find relief in realising that there's this whole community of people out there who feel the same way that they do, because one of the things we've always been told as women is that our experience of the world is in our head, it's made up, that we don't really properly, objectively understand the world that we live in, and that any kind of emotional response we have to it is hysterical and irrational. Suddenly you're confronted with all of these... Suddenly you're confronted with all these incredible women who not only share similar philosophies to you, but can challenge you to learn more, will give you different and new perspectives. And it's impossible for anyone to challenge that. That's why it's so frightening to people, and that's why there's such a huge backlash against women who use the internet now and who operate in these online spaces, because it terrifies people who can no longer control that conversation and that dialogue. So for me, any kind of harm that might be out there online is mitigated completely by the fact that women are able to communicate and connect in this new, more productive way than has ever been made available to us before. And I promise I'll finish very quickly. But also that, and this is the most important thing, that it's kind of like, it's allowed us to look at, I'm going to use two analogies, and one is the Emperor's new clothes. It's allowed us to look and see that the Emperor is not wearing any clothes. And it also... who's read Harry Potter? All right, so you guys will know what I mean when I talk about the boggart. So a boggart is a creature who lives in a closet, generally, or in dark spaces. And when you open the closet door, the boggart comes out and takes on the form of the thing that you're afraid of most. And the only way to defeat the boggart is to laugh at it and to ridicule it so that it essentially becomes ridiculous and is destroyed. And for me, that is probably one of the most powerful things that the internet enables women to do now, is to operate together to demystify these kind of spectres and boogie monsters that have always kind of kept us silent and afraid, and allowed us to really laugh at them. You know, when you watch other women handling trolls online in a way that makes you feel, oh, maybe I can do that too. Maybe I don't have to listen to what this person's saying to me. Maybe I don't have to feel bad when they call me a fat, ugly slut. Maybe I can laugh at them about it. And when you kind of see, like, as I've seen over the last few years, more and more women banding together to do that, it makes me feel like the kind of positivity and the goodness that is available to us in terms of that organisation and in terms of being made confident to not feel afraid anymore of what might be the response if we actually stand up for ourselves and we actually talk about issues that matter, like men's violence against women, like domestic violence, like sexual violence, etc. That is a hugely positive thing for me. So thank you for letting me talk about that.
I think that raises a couple of issues. We launched today a website called Not the Only One, which is where women can go online. Laura Tarzia, who's down the front here, you know, people can go online, they can tell their stories, and that's such a powerful thing, and women can see that, and I think you've said that. But I also know with research with people who do the trolling, that what they're looking for is a reaction and attention, you know, and so, you know, I'm interested, and that they feed off the fact that you might laugh at them or ridicule them or whatever. I just like your comment. I mean, there's only been a limited amount of research.
I don't think that it's so much that they feed off you laughing at them. I think that previously if they've wanted a reaction, it has been to make you mad, because there's nothing funnier than making a woman angry and being able to further your conviction that women are just hysterical creatures. But actually, I think mainly what they want you to do is shut up and be silent and be scared and close all of your accounts and go back to being meek and mild.
Yes. And this particular thing I was reading was also about people who are journalists like yourself and who actually make their money from being able to do stories, etc. And that's a really double blind where many of them have felt frightened and have shut down their accounts and all those sorts of things.
Oh, I should just very quickly as well just say that that's my method of dealing with it. And if, I wouldn't expect that should have to be everyone's method. It's more frightening to some people and maybe they're not at the stage yet where they've become completely desensitized to the things that are said to you online. So that's just the way that I deal with it.
Yes. Yeah. That's fine. So Nancy, we move to you. Nancy Glass. You've spent quite an amount of time developing and evaluating technological solutions to assist women and children on their pathways to safety. How do you see these tools, these online tools and apps, assisting women and children? And is this a model we should be building on for the future?
Thanks, Kelsey. First, I just want to say I feel more empowered to deal with the internet now just sitting beside you. It's fabulous. Because I have to say that I'm a little bit older, I think, than you are. And, I haven't had that space that you're talking about that feels safe enough to respond back. So it's very interesting. So I have been, since 2003, when technology was about a bit different. We were working on laptops and trying to connect to the internet, thinking about women's decisions around safety and how complex they are. They are considering so many issues around their relationship, their love for their partner, their privacy, their want to not, what we do in society around shaming women or the dignity of the family, but also having resources. Very practically, the health insurance in our country can often be linked to the employed person in the home. Having a home, having someone that a lot of women say, the resource of having my husband or my partner there to help with the children. So there's multiple things women are balancing in their decisions around safety. So we're not focused on, I focus on safety decision aids is what we're looking at, helping women make decisions based on their priorities, their values, the knowledge about resources, rather than, it's really the outcome is how to be safer, not to end a relationship or leave a partner, but safety if they are ending the relationship, because it's a very dangerous time for women, or safety if they're staying in the relationship and how to help them stay as safe as they can. Knowing that women are doing things every day, sometimes every minute, around safety for themselves and other people in their family. So acknowledging that this is not, that they're already acting this out every day, but how do we help them link to resources that can provide them with more information? How do we help them clarify their priorities around safety? And then also learn more about the dangerousness in their relationship. So we developed, we call it a safety decision aid. It's advanced quite a bit from 2003. 13 years, we now have an app that's called My Plan, and it's really about helping women. They can download it to their smartphone, and I completely agree with, our goal is to increase access, but we do need to think about safety strategies because how technology can be used to really stalk women, to harass them. So we do provide information as women download. It's password protected, but also on safety in using technology. And it doesn't say anything about this is an app around relationship violence. It's really called My Plan. It could be a calendar scheduling tool. It's pretty innocuous. It also, if someone forces them to put in their password, we give them information about putting in 4 zeros instead of their password. So it'll go to this innocuous, like I think a women's health study that's not anything about domestic violence, so that if someone's trying to make them put in a passcode. But so working with experts and consultants and advocates to really, and survivors to really think about safety and using these tools is critical. But it's about women looking at sort of weighing their priorities around safety for themselves, safety for children, having resources, their privacy, as well as their love for their partner. And based on their priorities, we then also provide them a tool to really assess how dangerous the relationship is. So we have validated tools that exist that tell women how do they, is the violence increasing in severity and frequency in the past year? We also talk about, in our country, gun ownership, because that is extremely dangerous if a gun's in the home. So those responses on those tools gives them information about their risk for repeat severe violence. And then based on their inputs, we provide them with a tailored safety plan. So strategies that are based, so if they talk about gun ownership, there's a gun in the home, we're going to connect links to safety, gun safety in the home, and strategies around gun safety. If their children are their highest priority of safety and they're concerned about their children and their partners threatening children, we're really going to link them to their county, their state resources that can help them answer the questions so that they need in resources. So this is not a tool to replace the amazing work that's done in professional organizations, advocacy, healthcare, social work, all the great work that's done in the community, but a tool to help really get women to those services if they don't know they exist. Because what we know is many women will never access traditional services, but they're looking for resources, and we know the internet is a place that many women in the US, we're seeing that divide collapse between most people have access, they may not have wireless in their home, but they have a data plan, and they do use that data plan to search for information. So we're trying to build that out to help women link to the sources that they want to link to, and so that's where we're taking the decision aids.
Thanks, Nancy. And I'm going to turn to Anastasia now, because we'd like to hear a little bit more about technology-facilitated abuse in society, and I know you've done some work in the area.
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. And I guess there's 3 points that I'd like to speak to around that. And the first is that we really do need to recognise the harms that are being done to women with the aid of technology, because I think too often these harms are minimised. They are dismissed as though women are making it up or just can't take a joke, or, it's all in their head, and that, if you don't like what's happening, you should just get offline or turn off your devices. But of course, there are some very real harms. There are women who are experiencing threats of violence, stalking, surveillance, psychological abuse. We know that this is often also from a known man, often from a partner or an ex-partner, but also, as we're increasingly connected, women experience abuse and stalking from strangers or from anonymous people online, who they then are left wondering, is that ex-partner that has gone quiet for a while, but suddenly now I'm getting these harassing messages. And my colleagues and I, Nicola Henry and Asha Flynn, have also been researching various forms of technology-facilitated sexual violence and also image-based abuses like so-called revenge pornography, where sexual or intimate images are distributed without someone's consent. And we've really been exposing, I suppose, the way that communications technology is being used in a whole range of ways to threaten, stalk and harass women. And looking to identify what are the gaps in the law that we need to close to address those harms, what are the gaps in services and support and information that we need to address. But I suppose the second thing that I wanted to comment on in relation to this is that I think it's really important that we don't forget that it's not the technology that's doing this harm to women. It is people, often men, who are doing the threatening, the harassing, the stalking, the so-called revenge pornography. So it's people, just as it is in face-to-face violence, harassment and abuse, people who choose to abuse women. And so if the problem is people, our solutions also have to be directed at people, at social solutions. Technology is going to be part of that, but it's going to be about harnessing what we already know about social change in this area, about promoting gender equity and respect, about challenging the gendered norms and stereotypes that emphasise men's aggressiveness or dominance or power or control, and that emphasise women's role as being meek or passive or standing in the background and tolerating this sort of behaviour. We need to put those same efforts into policy, into prevention, into law and justice to deal with gender-based violence across the board, of which technology-based abuse is just one part. And I suppose the third point that I wanted to make in relation to this is that, of course, we need to do that work together. It is going to involve collaboration with tech companies and developers, and we've heard some fantastic initiatives today in our discussions, and I know that those discussions will continue to be had. It's working with NGOs, with the women's sector, harnessing that expertise, that experience of working with women, speaking with victim survivors themselves about their needs and about how to keep them safe, about what they need and want, working with education, with government, with universities and researchers. And it's by doing those things, by harnessing the knowledge we already have about addressing gender inequality as the fundamental underpinning of gender-based violence, that we can start to use technology as a tool. And of course, we are seeing technology used as a tool to so-called take back the tech. It's been a phrase used in our discussions a lot today. Some of you might be aware about that global movement. To support survivors, to challenge gender inequality, to promote positive action, to further our activism, to connect women globally. And so I guess to my thinking, the key thing is that it's not technology that is doing the harm to women, it is people who choose to harass and abuse. But the good news is that it is also people who can use that technology, can work together to create social change and to move closer to a future without violence.
Excellent. And I think it's a good reminder that what we're talking about today is just one aspect of many responses and issues that need to be addressed. So we're going to turn to Emily Maguire now, who Domestic Violence Resource Centre Victoria has done a lot of work in the space, developing resources to assist women to be online safely. Do you want to tell us a little more about that?
Sure. I just need to apologise to everyone first. I've got a cold, so there's a high likelihood that I'm going to start coughing and spluttering, and I don't think I can do that subtly, but just let me talk. So I think one of the conversations we have that's been picked up on here as part of this panel discussion is that we often expect women to keep themselves safe when they're using technology, and that's one of the things that our research has shown is that when women will disclose to police and talk about a breach of an intervention order being through the sending of a text message, for example, or through a phone call, as opposed to a violent perpetrator turning up on a doorstep and breaching that physical boundary, police often, not always, but often are less likely to take the breach of an intervention order that is tech facilitated as seriously. There's no such thing as a serious or a not serious breach of an intervention order. Any breach is a serious breach. And so one of the things that we need to do is police that a little bit better and make sure that our police and justice systems are recognising, like everyone here has talked about, the harms that are caused by technology facilitated violence. Because as Anastasia said, this has been happening. Violence against women and men's violence against women has been happening for many, many decades. Technology is just a newer, faster and more ubiquitous way that men are able to perpetrate and to use technology to control their partners or their ex-partners. So when we talk about keeping women safe, it's a complex conversation to have, because what we don't want to do is put the onus on women to keep themselves safe. But the reality is a lot of us, and I'll very much include myself in this, don't know what our phones and our computers have got the capacity to do. Technology moves so quickly that it's really, really hard to keep up. It's hard for us to keep up, it's hard for family violence services to keep up, and it's hard for police to keep up. Perpetrators, on the other hand, do a whole lot of research to make sure they are keeping up, to make sure that they're using the latest technology to control their partners or to harass them or to stalk them or to use tech to facilitate them. There are some really simple things that women can do to try and make sure that they're still able to stay connected to technology, because we know it's one of the best ways that women can maintain contact with their social networks, get in contact with the family violence service. The worst case scenario for us is that women disconnect from services and disconnect from technology, because it doesn't help them in the long run. They need to make sure that they have got someone to talk to, and tech is often a really good way of doing that, particularly if you're living with a violent partner who is not enabling you or not allowing you to leave the home or to allow your friends and family to come over. So some of the really simple things you can do is be aware, turn off geotagging on your phone, to make sure you're aware of the settings on your phone, to use, secure passwords that are unidentifiable. A lot of these things are really common sense to women who've grown up with technology, and are becoming increasingly common sense to women who haven't grown up with technology but who use it now. But I think what we need to start doing is to change the conversation. Instead of talking about what women can do to keep safe, there are two other things that we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about, as Anastasia says, accountability and perpetrator accountability, and holding the men who use technology to perpetrate violence to account through the legal system, through calling them out online, as Clem does when she has conversations and is blamed for, whatever the inappropriate thing that men thinks that she has done. But we also need to make sure that we've got a service system, and by service system I mean police, courts, family violence services, and in this space I mean companies like Apple or tech companies or IT services or your local computer shop. We need to make sure that all of those people are talking to each other to make sure that women get the best response. I think there's a real fear of technology, and partly that's because tech can be used to perpetrate violence against women. But the other fear of technology is that it's unknown. We don't know, a lot of us, how to use it. We don't know the nuance of it, and it's really hard to control and to understand a lot of the minutiae of technology. So family violence services who deal on a daily basis with providing support and information and advice to women are often quite confronted by technology. They may not, like the rest of us, may not even know what geotagging is. For example, when I started in this organisation, I had to have someone explain it to me, and I'm, a young woman. So we're expecting services to have an expertise that they may not necessarily have. So one of the things we've got to do is skill up those services and make sure they're comfortable with technology and know how it's used to perpetrate violence. But on the other hand, we also need to make sure that police or courts or, your local Apple shop or your local IT person, whoever it is who you can go to and get advice, to make sure that they have what we call a family violence lens, to make sure that they understand what family violence is and how tech can be used and can provide advice. So I think that's one of the best things that we can do to help women be safe.
Excellent. And that moves us... moves us on to Mark Oliver, who's from a tech company, and your company Tigerspike has been involved in developing some apps and some websites, has worked with us around safety decision aids and access for services. And so I'd like you to think about how do you see the way forward in this space?
Okay, well, hello everybody. So I'd sort of like to answer that in two channels, and the first one is about the terminology around technology, which I think the term technology can be a misdirection on occasion. I'd like to talk about how that technology gets to market, the frameworks and methodologies that are accelerating products into your hands. And then the second part of that is about the workforce and how enterprise can play a role, an increasing role, about how technology is brought to bear in this channel. You will like this, Kelsey. I'm going to a quick game of buzzword bingo. Lean startup. Hands up if you know what that means. Scrum. And finally, and this is the one that I think we'll explore a little bit more. Fail fast. Okay. So what we've...
Because I didn't understand a word you said when you first came to it.
I'm guilty of using these buzzwords. However, there is a reason why I bring those into the conversation. What we've seen, we tend to talk about technology in terms of interface, so the thing that you hit at the end of the interaction. So whether that be a form factor, phone, screen, TV, or whether that be in another interaction. what we have seen in the technology landscape is a profound change in the way products are being delivered to market. So that is, we are able to come to a final product and to deliver something extremely quickly. And that has changed massively over the last 10 years, over the last decade. And that's very, very important when you consider that all the checks and balances that the research community have in place to validate the decisions that they put into technology and product are being condensed now into weeks or months worth of development. And these are frameworks within the agile space that we know is an important factor of the current government. These are words that are important. It is a terrific statement to make if you are working in retail. It is a terrific statement to make if you are working in banking, for instance, or insurance. When you bring the notion of fail fast, which is how quickly can we get something to market and learn from the people who are using it, when you bring that terminology into domestic violence, I don't think anyone would agree in this, I think everyone would agree in this forum that fail fast in domestic violence probably has a profound effect at the end of it. We don't want to do that. So what we've got is technology and two people in a bedroom who are able to leapfrog institutions by the tools that they're using, the frameworks that they're using to deliver it, the terminology and the interactions that they're having to play around with products and get them into market to people who may or may not use them in a way that's going to complement or challenge them. And in this channel, it's hugely important to understand that. So the word technology for me needs to be countered by how we are getting these projects to market. It's very important to understand. So what's the opportunity? Where are the things that are interesting for the research community? Well, we've just been talking about 2 or 3 wonderful projects that are currently in year 2 of a 3-year program before they get to people who need them. I suggest to you that within 6 months, the technology landscape would change, and therefore some of the assumptions being made in the commitment of the projects that are under test will also change. So my question to the research community is, how can you be faster? It's a basic question. How do you become faster? And that may or may not be challenging, but there are tweaks that you can make that will see you in market 18 months instead of 3 years. And that is an important statement to make. The other part of that, which maybe we are all guilty as people who are bringing projects to market in the digital space, is how can the research community sell the value of what they're doing better to the people who are rapidly producing digital products? So there are a couple of levers that you can pull to maybe either rein in or educate this profound change in the way that products are being delivered to market. The output, the interfaces are getting there quicker, not necessarily with the testing or the validation that we require. Some of the benefits that we saw with the DAISY application that we brought to market with 1-800 RESPECT was the sort of things that you won't hear in terms of its success in market, was that it took 9 weeks for us to get that to market. That is language that is very, very unusual in this particular space. Why? We opened up all channels across all states. We used an accelerated model with subject matter expertise people sitting next to us as we tap the keyboard. Makes a big difference. So the faster we can get to educating the research community and the world that we live in here on how to get the products through quicker, the better. Right? So that's my first statement. The second part of that was a conversation about the role of the workplace. And I'm excited by what the workplace can offer here. Largely, there are 2 words that are important: adoption and engagement. So adoption is who uses it and how quickly can you get them to use it. Engagement basically means how long they have a relationship with whatever product that you present to them. And the workplace and enterprise is in an absolutely unique position to enforce adoption. As part of your KPIs, when you come and work in our corporation, we require you to download the Daisy app and interact when you need to. That is, whilst it's an ugly phrase to be comfortable with, enforced adoption is the way that you actually get engagement from the workplace. And we had a lovely question earlier that I've actually been thinking about during the day, which is how do you get these projects into enterprise? And I hadn't used that terminology before, but I've come back round to something I think that could be quite powerful, which is you absolve away any responsibility of enterprise to act on the information going into the applications that they present through enterprise. Why? Well, because when they have that information, there is no longer plausible deniability about being able or not having the information to act on it. So the types of passive interaction or the information products to help individuals in an enterprise is really effective. People can go away and use them to build resilience or manage environments or contact services that are important to them. As soon as you expose enterprise to data that says that they can act on it, there is a program of work and investment that has to support that, because that's a full term of life engagement, which is investment, which is management, which is commitment. And to be frank, there may not be that allegiance in the workforce that says, in 5 years' time, as we've invested and supported you through a really complex period of your life, that we are going to see the return on that investment. So workplace and enterprise has a massive part to play as long as we treat it delicately.
Okay. I so wanted to finish on a positive note. So before that, I was about to ask, can we sort of have something helpful or positive to finish on? Because I think the thing is that overwhelmingly people across we're saying that we can harness it for good. And I know in the work that I've done that's similar to Nancy's, the quotes from the women about when they're able to access these online things that provide support, it's changing their lives. Companies are investing in this. There is opportunities for all of us to walk together to help women and children on a pathway to safety. And I hope we've given you some ideas, the way that you could assist or help, and we'd all like to work with you and hear from you. So I'll do my thanks now. Another half hour has gone by. And once again, I'd like to acknowledge DVRCV for doing the videotaping and the funding we've got from the University of Melbourne, who've really invested in this area. They've formed this alliance through a Hallmark Institute, and we've got support from the institutes, the Melbourne Social Equity Institute and the Melbourne Network Society Institute. So thank you all for coming, and thanks to the panel.